Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier, and I trust all goes well. I'd like to thank Tamisho, Bonnie, Tunya and David Williams of CNBC for having me on their show this morning. Thank you all. My macro thoughts remain with the dollar, and as I said over the weekend, I think the dollar has just started getting going. That there will be a lot of blood in the water, and that there is a small window if we want to be the sharks. Home thoughts went back to John Keats, whom I studied for A-level. The problems of the world cannot possibly be solved by skeptics and cynics, whose horizons are limited by the obvious realities. We need men who can dream of things that never were. You have absorbed me. He died very young, very poorly. I have a sensation at the present moment as though I was dissolving. And then I like this one. It keeps eternal whisperings around desolate shores. And finally, I'll give you a Roland Barthes quote. What the public wants is the image of passion, not passion itself. Political reflections. Hong Kong protests are a threat to Xi and his Chinese dream. The swelling protests in Hong Kong that have gripped the world's attention are Xi Jinping's and the Chinese Communist Party's worst nightmare. The fear is that if not properly contained, the street protests could flare into China's own version of a color revolution, like the Orange Revolution in Ukraine, and prove an existential threat to the leadership. Street movements can evolve into revolution when more demonstrators become embroiled in them, wrote the English edition of the People's Daily Owned Global Times yesterday. However, Hong Kong is not a country. It neither has the conditions for a color revolution, nor are the forces on the street influential enough to mobilize its entire populace. Ultimately, this writer in Business Week believes, if it were deemed absolutely necessary, Xi and the rest of the top leadership probably would not shrink from aggressively squashing the protest movement. The likely economic and business fallout would be unfortunate, but a cost worth accepting to ensure China's continued authority over Hong Kong. Xi is remembered for some ominous lines he delivered in an internal speech in late 2012 on the collapse of the former Soviet Union. Why did the Soviet Union disintegrate? Why did the Soviet Communist Party collapse? An important reason was that their ideals and convictions wavered, Xi said. Finally, all it took was one quiet word from Gorbachev to declare the dissolution of the Soviet Communist Party, and a great party was gone. In the end, nobody was a real man. Nobody came out to resist. Hong Kong protesters continue to block roads as leaders set a deadline. Blocking roads in central Hong Kong. That was yesterday, was the fifth day of pro-democracy demonstrations. Crowds swelled to the tens of thousands. Police largely kept their distance. At a press conference, student leader Joshua Wong, Lester Shum and Alex Chow were detained at the start of the protest and then released, called on Loyng to respond to their demands by tomorrow or risk an escalation of the standoff. When asked at a press conference today whether he would resign, Loyng said that any personnel changes would result in the existing election committee choosing his successor rather than through a vote, and seemed to be reconciled to it taking a bit of time. Dismissed speculation that the People's Liberation Army, which was used to crush the 1989 Tiananmen Square demonstrations, would be used in Hong Kong. I think that would be a very bad move. The protests spurred by China's decision last month that candidates for the 2017 leadership election must be vetted by a committee posed the biggest challenge to China's control of the city since British colonial rule ended in 1997. The clashes with police this week were the city's biggest since unrest in the 1960s, led by pro-communist groups inspired by Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution. Police arrested 89 people during the weekend demonstrations. I'm sure Beijing, these are my conclusions, will tread with a great deal of care. I understand that Xi Jinping can be a chest thumper, but in this situation I think he's walking on eggshells, and any overreaction would quickly accelerate in what is an already fluid situation. I'll put up an image of protests in Hong Kong, another image I found on Flickr. And Asia Times is asking, is Xi losing control of the peripheries? Tens of thousands of activists continue to defy the authorities in Hong Kong by occupying entire city blocks in the heart of the city. Recent comments by Xi Jinping about yet another piece in China's puzzle of instability, Taiwan, suggest that the leadership may be panicking. Two options present themselves. One is that Xi's advisors are so bad as to believe that Taiwanese indeed share the dream of unification the Chinese leader was referring to last week. Given the deeply flawed nature of authoritarian regimes, this wouldn't be the first time that the man at the top was denied intelligence that contradicts his views of the world, and saying that signs that Taiwan is slipping away, and expecting, saying this is all presaging greater tensions across the Taiwan Strait. On the 2nd of December 2013, I wrote about the periphery and I called it a tinderbox, and I had not factored in Hong Kong. I was talking about Xinjiang and other places. Justin Raimondo, who writes in Anti-War, says that China is a paper tiger. The Hong Kong rising underscores China's fragility, which is an interesting point. Far from posing a military challenge to the West, Beijing can't even control one of its major cities, and the mighty CCP is being humiliated by a 17-year-old boy. For all the predictions of its coming hegemony, the reality is that China is a paper tiger. China's political class is sitting atop a volcano with the prestige of the CCP at an all-time low, and rising economic inequality combined with slowing growth producing potentially volatile conditions. Their rule is so brittle at this point that a single incident could shift the balance of forces away from stability and towards the chaos that the older generation remembers from the days of the Cultural Revolution and greatly fears. This is the argument the government makes continually in the face of rising protests. It's either us or chaos. Wall Street Journal tweeted, "Meet the 17-year-old public face of Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement." I'll put up that image. And a very interesting piece in Bloomberg about the Islamic State draws UAE into fight against extremists. For the desert cities of Dubai and Abu Dhabi, luxury, prosperity and security in a region torn by conflict are things worth protecting. In a country known more for building glitzy shopping malls and trophy skyscrapers than battling terrorists, the UAE is involved in the fight against Islamic militants like never before. It took part last week in US-led airstrikes against the Islamic State, underlining the scale of the perceived threat from the extremists after they took cities in Iraq and this month gained ground in Syria. This is more than a red line for them, and that is why they are proactively taking part in these strikes, said Gunnar Nisabeh. The UAE and fellow Gulf Arabs regard Islamist groups as an existential challenge to their thriving economies and monarchies, relatively untouched by the uprisings over the past 4 years. But clearly the schism in that group of countries is between Qatar and the rest. But they've taken a much more aggressive posture across the UAE, Abu Dhabi, Dubai, and it's not clear to me whether the approach is the best one. I'm not sure it is, but we remain in a very tricky situation, particularly for them. Whenever I land in Doha or Dubai, I really feel perched on the edge of the land mass, as if somebody could come and just push it over into the sea. which is something I think Saddam Hussein thought of doing. Doha from the sky in the morning from last week. A photograph of Dubai taken from the sky earlier this year. I wrote in February that Dubai is the real transit state, a connection point in an interconnected century. I'll also put up a photograph of the Grand Mosque in Abu Dhabi as well. Apparently, the first patient to be diagnosed with Ebola outside Africa is being treated at a Dallas hospital. This is a Liberian gentleman who left Monrovia September 19, arrived in the US September 20. It is certainly possible that someone who had contact with this individual could develop Ebola in the coming weeks, but there is no doubt in my mind that we will stop it there, said Freedom. If you haven't had a chance to look at that inside story I did with Ebola with Laura Kyle, do have a look at that. And I'll also put up an image of the Ebola virus magnified 108,000 times that I found on Business Week. And as I've said previously, viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. And I said that on the 18th of August, on the 25th of August, I was speaking about how the virus was gaining velocity. However, one chink of good news is there have been no new cases since August 31st, and the last 3 patient contacts will exit their 21-day follow-up on October 2nd, strongly suggesting that the outbreak in Nigeria has been contained. Returning to international markets, as I wrote in my piece over the weekend, a small window for sharks as the dollar rises. This time last year, the US was printing $85 billion a month under its quantitative easing program, and the party was in full swing, like in the great Gatsby novel, in which the author Scott Fitzgerald writes, "In his blue gardens, men and girls came and went like moths among the whisperings and the champagne and the stars." The punch bowl just kept on giving. Well, next month, or was it this month, the entire QE program gets wrapped up. And I said the market's been wrestling with some serious hangover effects. The euro was last at 126.13. Euro dollar touched 125.71, which was the strongest level for the dollar since September 2012. Dollar index 86.05, Japanese yen 109.94, touched 110.09, which is the highest level for the dollar since August 2008. Swiss franc 0.9564, the pound 161.90, Aussie 0.8676, reached 0.8666, which is the weakest since Jan 24. India rupee 61.97, South Korean won 1062.45, the Real 243.94, Egyptian pound 714.91, and the South African rand 1132.35. Interesting data came out of the IMF, where they said yesterday that the proportion of euro holdings in allocated official reserves dropped by 3.5%, the biggest decline since the first quarter of 2009. The euro share stood at 24.2% in the second quarter, from 25% in the prior 3 months, while the dollars rose to 60.7% from 60.3%. It's going higher still. Dollar index, I'll put up a 3-month chart. I'm buying call options. Dollar yen, this crossed 110 for the first time since 2008. Euro dollar, as I said, touched 125.71, lowest level for the euro since September 2012. The euro has fallen about 10% from a 2.5-year high reached in May. Inflation in the Eurozone, which is its nose barely above 0.4%, could go negative in the next 12 months, in my view. That's what I wrote over the weekend. And again, we saw a print of 0.3%. I came across this photograph, Shinkansen bullet trains at a depot in Fukuoka from 1975. I quite like the photograph. The Bloomberg Commodity Index fell 12% since June 30. Gold, I'll put up a 1-year chart. We're now at 1207.97, and I wrote in brackets, going down. Fell as much as 1.2% at 1204.30, which was the lowest level since January the 2nd. Crude oil also took a big tumble, $91.42, but I still think we're trying to base above 88.50. US oil exports are set to surpass a record held since 1957, as traders find ways around a 4-decade ban on supplies leaving the country. The US sent 401,000 barrels a day abroad in July, 54,000 barrels shy of the record set in March 1957. We're going to see a lot more of that. Cocoa, interestingly, has been a safe haven. And I'll put up a chart here, 1-year chart. You can see it's really performed well, partly on the Ebola concerns. There is a link under Rich Wrap-Ups for the Hong Kong Hang Seng Index if you're interested to have a look at that. Burundi's government wants the US Federal Bureau of Investigation to assist in investigating reports of decomposed bodies being found floating in a lake bordering Rwanda. Spokesman Philippe Nzombor-Ariba said the FBI, through the US Embassy in Burundi last week, offered to help identify the bodies and gather evidence of the deaths. Bujumbura fishermen on Lake Ruero have found about 40 bagged corpses floating in the water since July. It is up to the qualified agents of investigation to see where these bodies come from, as Burundi and Rwanda reject all the paternity of the bodies. South African oil share is up 6.65% this year, but it has fallen 2,906 points since July 29th, when it closed at a record above $52,000 rand. I think it looks increasingly like it's going to print 12 this year. It's at an 8-month low, wider than forecast trade deficit. Somebody describing it as a bit of a train smash. Exports dropped 9.6%. Shipments of mineral products, which include coal and iron ore, fell by 24%. Precious metals and stones down by 15%. Imports rose by 1.4%. So you can see what the problem is. Egyptian pound 715.03, where it's been for a long time. Egyptian stock market up a mighty blistering 44.66% in 2014. It was up only 4% when I wrote this in January. I said if the equity markets had a vote in Egypt, Army General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi would actually get one of those, impossible to believe votes of 99.8%. The Nigerian oil share is marginally negative for the year, minus 0.287% and at 3-week highs. The Ghana Stock Exchange Composite Index is at 6-week lows, but it's still positive for the year, 4.3822%. The Ghana Cedi is set for its first quarterly gain in 2 years on the IMF bond news. First quarterly advance in 2 years. Appreciated 1.8% in the 3 months through September, having previously weakened 43% in the preceding period. I remember doing an interview on BBC and saying that Mahama just had to dial up Christine Lagarde, and I'm glad to say he finally did. Interesting report about botched customs upgrade, cutting off Congo's second city. A month ago, the DRC's border post with Zambia, one of Africa's busiest land frontiers, went high-tech with a web-based customs system that was meant to improve efficiency and eradicate corruption. It's not quite working to plan. Kenya's GDP was assessed to be 25% bigger after the authorities changed the base calculation year to 2009 from 2001. Economic output was calculated to be $53.3 billion after rebasing, up from $42.6 billion. Minister for Devolution and Planning Anne Waiguru told a news conference. Growth in 2013 was calculated to be 5.7% after rebasing, up from the previous estimate of 4.7%. Kenya has now overtaken Ghana and Tunisia after the overhaul. World's Bank estimate of Ghana's economy is 48 billion for Ghana and 47 billion for Tunisia. I did an interview yesterday with Bob Collymore of Safaricom. The link for the share prices is on Rich Wrap-Ups if you want to have a look. I thank Bob for that interview. We'll release it in little bite sizes. We just released a little bit about voice, and then I'll release the entire video later on today. I thank Bob for that interview. I got to his office a little bit earlier. We were setting up, and he loves helicopters, and there's a little helicopter on one of his desks. I took a photograph of that. I learned Safaricom is setting up an angel fund with $1 million. That's a good thing. I'll put up a photograph of Bob's office as well. interesting piece by GSMA about the Kenya's journey to digital financial inclusion. If you're interested in that, good infographic to have a look. Kenya shilling is at 89.261. It's down just over 3% this year, which isn't a bad performance when you consider what's been going on. The Nairobi All Share is up 19.612% year to date, marginally off a record high set in September. NSE 20 up 6.6788%, 151 points below a more than 6-year closing high, above 5,400, reached on the 22nd of September. Mombasa County are looking to introduce extra taxes at the port. It's seen hurting shipping. Kenyan County Mombasa plans to levy additional charges on users of East Africa's biggest port, threatens the viability of the regional transport and logistics business. Cargo shipped via the port of Mombasa will attract an additional levy of $2 per metric ton or $10 per consignment. Transport and logistics accounts for 43% of the cost of doing business in East Africa. This is Dilbert Langat. We have been working to reduce it to 23%, but this increase in regulatory fees will drive it over 50%, making business unsustainable. The proposed levies will discourage investment in Kenya, Langat said. Some shippers are being forced to consider cheaper jurisdictions. It's extremely dysfunctional at this county level and in Co-8. On that note, I've got a photograph of the Likoni ferry taken 231 days ago. Eveready mounted a monster rally yesterday, up 78.81% on the news that they're going to get out of batteries and move into real estate. And in fact, that story applies to a number of other companies. And I hope those companies have watched the price reaction that Eveready enjoyed after that announcement. Once again, I'm deeply grateful to you for stopping by. We live in interesting times, a rhythmic world. Thank you.